In the first interview, we discussed Ignis Ardens and moved on to the crisis in the SSPX in 2012 on the back of the general chapter in 2012. So my first question to you is, would it be an overstatement to compare the doctrinal declaration to the SSPX what the Second Vatican Council is to the Church? Is that a false comparison or accurate?
No, I think that's a fair comparison. Some people might think it's an exaggeration, but even they would have to admit an exaggeration is only an exaggeration if there is some truth in it, right? And the only reason they would think that it's an exaggeration, I suspect, is because Vatican II was even more of a crashing down. The corruption of the best is the worst. And if you think about the enemy infiltrating the vast structure of the Catholic Church and the well-oiled diplomatic machine of the Vatican before, in the 50s and so on, by comparison, the SSPX is a very puny and very easy thing to infiltrate and subvert, and so therefore its fall didn't send quite the same shockwaves throughout the world. Also, on a level of sort of external aesthetics, they still have the traditional mass, right? And unfortunately, some people never really get past that. They don't really get to the essence of what you believe. They don't really get past just the aesthetics. Particularly, I hate to sound like a crusty old boomer, but the younger generation, I notice that, is all about aesthetics. And aesthetics are great, but if I want a beautiful Latin Mass in a beautiful church, like the Anglicans will literally give you that, and it's all just pure theatre and nothing else. You've got to get past that to belief. Now, as far as what we believe and what we stand for, and and so on, the work of the Holy Ghost, converting souls and so on, then yeah, 100%. Yes, I think so. I think the SSPX lost its raison d'etre, the thing that justifies its existence, the moment that document was signed and sent to Rome. And it's really clear, if you read between the lines, whenever they come out with something, ever since then, they're sort of struggling to justify their existence a little bit. Like, what's the point of the SSPX? Nobody in the SSPX prior to 2012 ever had any difficulty with that. They weren't busy wasting time and effort trying to justify their existence, because everybody knew what they stood for, and everybody knew it was vital and it was necessary and so on. Now there's just a feeling of like, we kind of need to justify ourselves. You notice that, and they spend a lot of time talking about themselves and justifying themselves. The SSPX in the past didn't waste its time talking about the SSPX, because it had more important things to talk about, like why Vatican II is wrong and why the local bishop is wrong and the new mass is straight from hell and all this kind of thing, which they don't really do anymore. They're a lot more kind of, there's a lot more navel gazing goes on, which is a byproduct of basically giving up the fight against Vatican II. Does that answer the question?
Yes, and a follow-on to that question is would it then also be correct to analogize and say that Bishop Williamson is for the resistance, or was for the resistance, what Archbishop Lefebvre was for the SSPX?
Right, Bishop Williamson, that's absolutely not true at all. God rest his soul now that he's died. But people, you should pray for him. But now that he's died, I kind of feel there is this movement to try and whitewash him, and it's foolish, it's rash, it's also dishonest to try and pretend that he was something which he wasn't. Bishop Williamson was not Archbishop Lefebvre, and he even said so himself many a time and oft, and he was telling the truth. Bishop Williamson was to the resistance what the doctrinal declaration was to the SSPX. It was Vatican II. Bishop Williamson, if you look at his teaching, Bishop Williamson is Vatican II inside the resistance.
What specifically about his teachings justify that? Because that's quite a wild statement.
The SSPX used to teach people that Vatican II, there's lots of sort of errors all over the place. It's kind of peppered with heresies and errors and all sorts. But the SSPX was very good at telling people there are sort of four main bad things to come out of Vatican II, four main heresies, and they are, I'm going to get the order wrong, but basically collegiality, ecumenism, religious liberty, and the new Mass. Now, if you look at Bishop Williamson's teaching, particularly his kind of post-2012, post-2013, really last 10 years of his life teaching, in the last decade of his life, the sort of leader of the resistance, which he wasn't, by the way, but the resistance phase of his life, his teaching, it has all sorts of novelties and errors and harmful bits in there, but it fits in, it falls into those same broad four things. The new Mass. Now, most people realise, I think now, that there's something, Bishop Williamson there's something about the new Mass with him. They realise that he either got it wrong about the new Mass, or he changed his teaching about the new Mass, or that he was liberal about the new Mass. Even the people that agree with him about that will sort of admit that. They don't realise just how far he went. And when you look at just how far he went on his teaching on the new Mass, it's really hair-raising. It's far more liberal than the SSPX, far more modernist than the SSPX as regards the new Mass. The other three, so with Vatican II, collegiality, ecumenism, religious liberty, Archbishop Lefebvre says those three things, I think in the reverse order, they correspond to the French Revolution: liberty, equality, fraternity. Liberty is religious liberty, and ecumenism and collegiality, equality, fraternity. But this is another important point I should have said earlier on. Vatican II is not a new thing. It's the French Revolution inside the Catholic Church, and in fact, it's quite interesting that it's not just traditionalists like Archbishop Lefebvre who say that. People who approve of it. Cardinal Ratzinger famously said that Vatican II, what is Vatican II? What does Vatican II mean? Vatican II, said Cardinal Ratzinger, is taking 200 years of revolutionary thinking and bringing it inside the church. He said that, and he said it approvingly. He agrees with it. He was a liberal peritus at the council. You can see him there wearing a suit and tie, sitting next to, I forget, not Hans, Karl Rahner, and it's true. So liberty, equality, fraternity, the teaching of the revolution, Vatican II, religious liberty, ecumenism, collegiality. Now with Bishop Williamson, there's definitely a religious liberty teaching there, definitely, unmistakably there. There's definitely a form of ecumenism. It's what most people would call tradecumenism, but it's there, in word and in practice. Collegiality, Bishop Williamson, now the correspondence, the analogy is not as obvious, but it's nonetheless there. Bishop Williamson had this teaching that was sort of, some people called it anarcho-traditionalism. Some people called it loose pockets, because that was his catchphrase for a while, only loose pockets. They're free to contact each other. How generous, thank you so much. We're free to contact each other. But basically, you're not allowed to work together. And if you're not allowed to work together, that just condemns you to never growing and not supporting each other. It means there's no mutual support. Think about it this way. In the SSPX apostolate, when one of the bishops goes and does confirmation, he doesn't fly into the country, do confirmation in that chapel and fly out again. They arrange it so that he goes round all the place. Since he's there, you might as well do the following day confirmation in the next city over, and he does a whole tour. But obviously that needs organising, that has to be coordinated. And in effect, what Bishop Williamson was doing, his teaching and his practice was, no, you're not allowed to do that. It's kind of every man for himself. And if you happen to live in one of these kind of little islands of where there happens to be a priest there who says Mass in one place and you happen to live there, great. But what about everybody else in the world outside? What are they meant to do? Are they all meant to move to Father Ringrose's parish in Vienna, Virginia? It's something that works against the formation of an apostolate. It's anti-apostolic. He also taught that the age of the seminary is now over. And he said this again and again. I'm constantly accused of attacking Bishop Williamson. My attacks on him largely consist of quoting his own words. You can, which even his, I think a lot of even his supporters really don't bother, that checking that closely on what he actually said. If you look through Elison Comments, a lot of it is boring and not that interesting. But buried in there are these radical things, where he says, for instance, the age of the seminary is over. When he consecrated Dom Thomas Aquinas in Brazil in 2016, a couple of Latin American websites connected to Father Trincado that were kind of cheerleading for Bishop Williamson published just reams and reams and reams of photos of the ceremony, but they didn't publish the sermon. And someone on our side did put the sermon up there on the internet, and then you understand why. The sermon is just, he keeps saying, no more seminaries, no more structure, no more people working together. The age of the seminary is over, the age of structures is yesterday. Now, the seminary is something that comes directly from the Council of Trent, so his teaching there is actually anti the Council of Trent, as his teaching about the new Mass is also anti the Council of Trent, incidentally. So in effect, what that does, loose pockets only that are free to contact each other, what is that? It's kind of like collegiality. It's almost more similar to it's kind of like a trad synodality of Pope Francis. It's like this, it's this weird, bizarre thing where everybody, sort of every man for himself kind of, and you do your thing there, but nobody takes responsibility over the whole, and no authority. I don't have any authority, and no authority can be had anymore, and that's it. The church is basically broken. The shepherd is struck and the sheep are scattered, he used to say. But he meant more than just that. He actually was kind of pushing that as like, this is a positive thing to be embraced. I say that, and I think the shepherd is struck and the sheep are scattered, and that's a terrible thing, and we need to counteract that, even if in whatever little way we can. But yeah, so what his teaching about structure and authority and no more seminaries and so forth.
But just on this point of the seminaries.
Yeah.
So when Europe had a different social structure than the 1500s, in the years of the hundreds, there weren't seminaries.
Right.
And couldn't we make the fair argument that, in fact, the modern world is far more different than the time of the Council of Trent than the world of the Council of Trent was 500 years before that. So perhaps Bishop Williamson actually showed prudence in with this sort of loose pockets ideas.
Okay, well, first of all, the Council of Trent is a council, not just a pope. Bishop Williamson is not even a bishop of a diocese, he's an auxiliary bishop. So does an auxiliary bishop get to overturn a council of the church, like the Council of Trent? And the answer is obviously no. You're right, in the Middle Ages, you didn't have seminaries, and the answer is, in the Middle Ages, in a country like England, here where we are, you had something approaching 1,000 religious houses all over the country. So not just every city and every town, even some villages had their local monastery. So you would just learn, and there was no Counter-Reformation yet, because there had not been a Protestant Reformation. So when the Jesuits led the charge in the Counter-Reformation, you see this very much more, it's not just enough anymore to learn your philosophy very well and learn your theology very well. You now also need to train your seminarians in polemics, in debating, in why they're wrong and we're right, and all this kind of thing. If you look at the very, very first seminary in the world that was set up in obedience to the Council of Trent, by the way, not many people know this, it was an English seminary, and it was meant to be started in England. Queen Mary Tudor and her cousin Cardinal Poole did all the groundwork to put it together, and just when it would have got off the ground, they both died, by the way, very suspiciously. Nobody's quite sure what of, and quite close to each other in time. There's some rumours that they may have been poisoned. Their deaths were both frightfully convenient to a lot of powerful people, but whatever, that's an aside. When they died, obviously Queen Elizabeth took over and became Protestant and took the country back in that direction. The seminary was ready to go. It couldn't be founded in England, so they just founded it in France, and they put this great man, Alan, I forget what his first name was, who later became Cardinal Alan. He was the first rector of it. That was the first seminary, I think, this is right, ever in the whole world, and it was set up as a response to the Council of Trent. But they kind of made the seminary formation consciously a lot more Counter-Reformation, anti the Protestants, that kind of thing. Yeah. So it's a changing world, and I mean, arguably, the modern world began round about then, right? The modern world kind of began once you have Henry VIII, and once you have the Elizabethan England era in England. That's kind of the beginning of the modern world. Yeah, and that's when seminaries get going. So if seminary is a thing of the modern world, I don't really see that there's an argument for let's go back to how things were in the Middle Ages when 100% of the population was Catholic. Like, things are not better now; they are worse than in the 1500s. So, and the other thing is of course, this is all, we're talking about the idea of a seminary in the abstract, but in the mouth of Bishop Williamson, it's not abstract. We can see that he was dead against the idea. Why? Because it fits in with everything else that he did, which was stop the resistance. And I think from day one, I think when he left the SSPX, looking back in hindsight, it's pretty clear that Bishop Williamson parted from the SSPX. They parted on somewhat amicable terms, right? There was no real attacks being bitterly thrown from one side to the other. They parted on amicable terms.
Isn't that just a credit to his character?
Well, no, in the circumstances. No, it's not, because there are plenty of things he should have attacked them for and didn't. And when you consider the fact that he said in the famous voicemail leaked by Father Pfeiffer, he said, they're going to make me an offer. Those are his words, talking about Menzingen and the SSPX. He says, they're going to make me an offer, I need to see what the terms are. They're going to throw me out, but they're going to make me an offer, I need to see what the terms are. Now, what the SSPX has to offer him is we'll kind of, we'll leave you alone, you can live in a quiet retirement in a nice little house by the seaside, and we'll even send a priest, Father Abraham, to go and live with you and do the cooking for you, whatever. The interesting question is, what did he have to offer them? What did he have to offer them that they would want? The only thing I can think of is, if, as seems inevitable, a resistance to Bishop Fellay's new SSPX starts to naturally form around him, stop it. Stop it from growing. And you don't need to openly attack it, you just sort of put a dead man's hand on it and make sure it goes nowhere, which is what he did from day one, and part of that was seminaries. But this teaching that the age of the seminary is now over, and there's no more authority anywhere, and people shouldn't organise, for mutual support, there should be no organised apostolate, etc., etc., etc. I mean, it's kind of borderline heretical ecclesiology, really. That, I think, somewhat corresponds to, like I say, collegiality, where, in effect, no bishop is really the monarch of his diocese anymore. He sort of outsources the decisions to a conference. Collegiality, they also tried to undermine the authority of the Pope. Even Paul VI had a problem with it. If something's too liberal for even Paul VI, then you know it's bad news. Because the papacy is kind of going to be democratised and be on a par with these bishops' conferences or whatever. And then, of course, you have synodality of Pope Francis. But really, Bishop Williamson's teaching on that score is kind of like trad synodality. The other two things you'll remember, ecumenism and religious liberty. But Bishop Williamson very often said, I believe in liberty. Father Jacquemin famously asked him, why are you not helping more priests to leave the SSPX? Oh, I believe in liberty. But he means the liberty where I just completely leave you alone and don't help you, which is not liberty at all. That's walking past a homeless guy in the street and not helping him. That's not liberty. That's lack of charity. Especially when it's actually your job. You're the one who is in a position to help and you refuse to do it. That's not liberty. But he said again and again and again, countless times, numerous times, in Elison Comments, emails, in conferences, here, there and everywhere, if you want to go and do this, go and do that, I'm not going to stop you. There's this famous Elison Comments from late 2014 where he says, if John wants to be a sedevacantist, I'm not going to persuade him otherwise, and if Jane feels that she has to go to the Novus Ordo, who am I to tell her otherwise, and if Bob wants to go to the SSPX, I'm not going to hammer him to get out of it, and I'm not even inclined to impose even a true viewpoint on anyone. Those are his words. That's religious liberty. That's trad religious liberty. Ecumenism, trad ecumenism, same thing. You notice there's a link between ecumenism and religious liberty, because if all religions are kind of equal, then you can just do whatever you like because they're all equal, right? The one naturally links to the other. religious liberty, tradecumanism. Bishop Williamson, not many people realise this. He went to the Sedevacantists in Nantes one time, in France. In Nantes, the Sedevacantists have a church. Bishop Williamson went there. He said Mass on their altar. He said a non unicum Mass where he left the name of the Pope out of the Mass. So there should have been a worldwide scandal. Nobody batted an eyelid. He went to a Feniite chapel in the United States. More than once. He came back the following summer, and I think he went back there a third time and did confirmations for them, said Mass on their altar, preached a sermon where he said, I'm very happy to be here at the chapel of Father Gavin Bitzer in Louisville, Kentucky. And now you can maybe try and say, well, maybe it's not, maybe it's, I don't know if there's such a thing as soft Fenianism or whatever, but you know what I mean? You could maybe try and talk your way around that one. Maybe he didn't realise, etc., etc. But no, the extraordinary thing is he didn't try and justify it at all. He didn't try and say, yeah, it's Fenianist, but he just treats it like it's the most normal thing in the world. He says, I'm here at Father Gavin Bitzer's chapel. Everybody knows that he's a Fenianite. He tells people, just, find some indult Mass somewhere, just try and find the least contaminated indult Mass. Then he tells people, just don't even, just find a Novus Ordo priest who actually believes in God, and that's basically it. The interview that he did with, I think it's a YouTube channel called Friends of Aquinas, and you can see the poor guy who's interviewing him is genuinely kind of a bit surprised and taken aback and scandalised, because he's kind of newly discovered tradition, and everybody knows Bishop Williamson is kind of the archetype traditionalist, is telling him, he doesn't say, by the way, go to the SSPX in Leicester, near where the guy lived in the Midlands, I think. Doesn't say doesn't say find an indult Mass somewhere in the Midlands. He doesn't even say, I tell you what, once a month, drive down to Broadstairs to my Mass. Doesn't even say that. Find a new Mass, find a Novus Ordo priest. Some of these Novus Ordo priests are very good, and I'm sure you can find one somewhere within the range of your petrol tank, he says. Now, they're very good, but now they're forced to say the new Mass. And he even makes excuses for the conciliar bishops. Oh, the bishops have been misled as well. It's not their fault. These conciliar bishops, they've been misled. Everybody's been misled. So that's his religious liberty. I mean, I could go on. He tells people at a conference in Texas that they should just go to the Sedevacantists, just try to find one that's not too crazy, that's not a raving lunatic. But if you find a Sedevacantist priest who's not a raving lunatic, you can go there, that's fine. He says in one conference, I'm sure you're all asking yourself, how are my grandchildren going to keep the faith? Well, the answer is they're going to do so by going to the new Mass, because as long as it's valid, they'll get grace from it. Now, most people don't realise how far that goes, by the way, with the new Mass. I mentioned that before, because this overlaps with his teaching on the new Mass. His teaching about the new Mass is not just that some people in some circumstances maybe can go to it. People positively should go to it in some circumstances, is what he teaches. And not just Novus Ordo Catholics who don't know any better. I think we would all agree, most conciliar Catholics out there have never even heard of the traditional Mass, very many of them. Okay, I think we would all agree it's not their fault. Now, the harmful effects are still there, and it's going to still turn them into a modernist, because, even if it's not entirely your fault, even if it's not your fault, you're still doing something that's harmful to you. But no, he said again and again, for instance, God has got all these Novus Ordo Catholics to save, not just the traditional ones. So, meaning, God wants to save people in and by and through the Novus Ordo. He said, I don't say to every priest or every faithful in the Novus Ordo, you've got to get out. He said, God bless all resistant Catholics in whatever part of the church they're in. He said, God bless all the faithful resistance Catholics inside and outside of tradition. Explain that one to me. He said that actually at the consecration of Gerardo Zendejas. I think, yeah, in 2017. So his teaching on the new Mass is, starting point is the miracles are real. Well then, I think there's serious grounds for saying they're not, because first of all, it's not actually a miracle if nobody sees it happen. oh, this host over the past week or two has changed into something, but no one witnessed it. Well, then that's not a miracle. Right? A miracle is where God does something in front of you that you actually witness. The one in Argentina is as dodgy as a 9-bob note. And Bishop Williamson used that as his example of Novus Ordo miracles, the one in Argentina. He talked about the one in Argentina again and again and again in Buenos Aires, until the Recusant ran a whole great big long study showing that it's as dodgy as a 9-bob note. And then suddenly, without missing a beat, he switched to Sokolka in Poland and that miracle. But he never said, sorry everybody, I got it wrong about the one in Argentina. He never said, let's talk about the one in Poland because maybe the one in Argentina isn't actually as good as I thought. He never actually admitted that, you see. It just shows that the whole thing is not really honest. By the way, who was the bishop who approved the Novus Bogus miracle? Not a miracle in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. It was one Monsignor Jorge Maria Bergoglio in the 1990s. Yeah. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm not. There is some sort of method to this. He's teaching on the new Mass. He's teaching on religious liberty and he's teaching on ecumenism. The problem is, error kind of has a life of its own. Once it's out there, it runs around and it wreaks havoc, and it passes from mouth to mouth, from ear to ear, from intellect to intellect. And Bishop Williamson is now dead and gone, God rest his soul, but his errors are still running around out there. And what's one of them, for instance, you hear this again and again, and it didn't used to be that common and now it's everywhere, is, oh, if it's valid you get grace from it. No, you don't. You don't. It can be valid and displeasing to God. How are you going to save your soul by choosing to repeatedly do something that displeases God? The fact that it's valid won't help you if it's displeasing to God, but they've got this idea, a lot of people now have got this idea, although all that matters is that it's valid. Where do they get that from? Largely from Bishop Williamson, it has to be said. Also, it's a counsel of selfishness, because I need to get my sacraments, I need to get grace. Why do I go to this Novus Ordo or that not very contaminated indult Mass, or this Sedevacantis Mass, but it's okay because he's not a raving madman. I need to get my grace for me.
Speaking about the sacraments, how would you describe what we might call the sacraments' first theology, and where do you trace its origins?
Well, its origins, like I say, Bishop Williamson has had a large amount to do with this. But does it originate with him? It used to be the case, if you rewind the clock, let's say 12 or 15 years, that the obsession over whether something is valid or not was largely confined to the Sedevacantists. You did occasionally meet Sedevacantists where it was all valid, 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 is it valid, is it valid? And generally speaking, people in the SSPX were a bit more sensible and a bit more well-formed, that they could sort of see that's missing the point. Yeah, but I think even people who don't necessarily realise that they are picking up and running with a ball that is really a Williamson thing, I think it does kind of, he is largely responsible for spreading that, even if it doesn't originate with him, if that makes sense. I once went to, this is years ago, Father Brendan King, and there was a young man there. He must have been in his early 20s, or maybe younger. And I'm sure he said he only could go there once a month because he didn't have a car and it was too far of a trek and all that kind of thing, and he couldn't afford it. And we said to him, well, what do you do on the other Sundays? And he said, oh, I just go to the Greek Orthodox or something. And we said, but hold on, what? That's outside the church. You can't do that. And do you know what he said in response? But it's valid. This is where this kind of insane logic leads you.
On this point of grace, if faith is a supernatural virtue, then, and in these days in which it's so difficult to keep the faith, as Archbishop Lefebvre said, then isn't there a justification for, isn't it a right and good desire to seek the sacraments?
Yes,
because
it is.
In order to nourish your faith.
Yes, exactly.
What's wrong with that?
It's a good in and of itself. Now, a good can be abused. It's good to eat food. Nevertheless, gluttony is a sin. So a good can be kind of put in the wrong place and it becomes an evil, but the thing in itself is still a good.
But surely you can never have too much grace.
No, but whether you get grace from something is another question. The sacraments are good, but they can be misused, right? A priest can abuse the sacraments to kind of manipulate people. Do this or I'll refuse you communion. Yeah. A bishop can do exactly the same. Bishop Williamson told Father Hewko, you're not getting any holy oils from me, etc., unless and until you publicly come out and say that every single Novus Ordo miracle is legit and all of that, and even then I might not, but I might. That's an abuse of it's not your thing, it's not your private possession. It's not your money to spend as you wish. It's something that doesn't belong to you. So, but it's still holy oils are still a good thing, right? Holy communion is still a good thing. It can be abused. Now, as far as grace, well, let me put it this way. Archbishop Lefebvre famously said that the devil's masterstroke was leading people away from tradition and into modernism through obedience. Is obedience a good thing? Yes, it is. But you can twist it and take it out of its proper context and abuse it. Yep. Mm. Okay, the devil's masterstroke in our age is to get people to turn their backs on tradition and on the fight for the faith through the sacraments. And it started, well, maybe it didn't start, but in my opinion, the first instance that comes to mind for me is 1988, when John Paul II and Cardinal Ratzinger set up the Society of St. Peter. You can have your Latin Mass and your sacraments and so on, your traditional sacraments, provided you abandon Archbishop Lefebvre, stop criticising the council, stop criticising us, don't fight against Vatican II anymore, be good, obedient little pretend trads, and we'll let you have your little pretend 1950s chapel, okay? I think there were only about a dozen priests or so who went with that offer and founded the Society of St. Peter. What were they doing by accepting that? They were taking the good of the traditional Mass and traditional sacraments and placing it above the fight for the faith and the public profession of the faith. That's the other important point. It's no good simply having the faith. You have to put it out there, you have to speak it, and you have to try and give it to other people. You have to confess Christ. Our Lord says, who confesses me before men, I will confess him before my Father in heaven. So this saying, keep the faith, it kind of misses the point. Obviously, you need to keep the faith, but you need to actually spread it. So do you see my point there? You're taking something that's good and putting it in a higher priority than it belongs. You're putting the sacraments above the faith. Mm. Yeah. And it's the same thing if you're saying, well, I'll turn a blind eye to Bishop Williamson's teaching on the new Mass because then I can have the services of a bishop. This is lots of priests, by the way, who know better. Or maybe even I'll be made a bishop. Great. Okay, you're now putting episcopal holy orders above the profession of the faith. You can't do evil that good may come of it. And you can't expect God in the end to bless that. So it's a foolish thing to do. What good is going to come of that in the end? Faith is a supernatural virtue, faith, hope and charity, but it has an object. So it's no good simply to say, I believe. Okay, what do you believe? What is the object? And the answer to that is Catholic doctrine, which is why if you read any of the great writers, not just Archbishop Lefebvre, Bishop de Castromayor, but from the 19th century, Cardinal P, Bishop Freppel, any of these great, Prosper Guéranger, they talk about Catholic doctrine as being the one thing which is absolutely inviolate and you lay down your life to defend. And they're absolutely right. Catholic doctrine is where it's at. Because that's the object. That is what you believe. And when somebody comes along and says, you can have sacraments, you can have even traditional sacraments, Tridentine sacraments, but the new Mass gives grace and people should go to it, even trads, and, and I believe in liberty and this, that and the other. No, sorry.
So, moving now away from Bishop Williamson, if he didn't take on a role of leadership or organisation within the resistance, was there any type of organisation between priests in the early days, at least?
Yeah, Bishop Williamson, by the way, was rather dog in the manger about it. For somebody who didn't want to be a leader or have authority, he certainly occupied a position of leadership and authority. But he didn't nominate someone else to replace him. You notice that? It's another clue as to what his game really was. Because everybody, even his most ardent supporters, saw him as a leader, an authority figure. And then they call themselves the resistance, even though he said he didn't believe in the resistance. So there's this sort of element of dog in the manger. It's like, no, you can't have that, but I'm just going to stay here to make sure nobody takes my place. There was the priests of the resistance. Anyone who remembers back sort of 10, 11, 12, 13 years ago will tell you they were a lot more united in the early days. And if you look back, somewhere on the internet you will find this declaration and that declaration where there's loads of priests put their names underneath it. Here's what we stand for. You know, the new SSPX has gone wrong. There was one called Only She Can Help You. There was one in sort of signed in South America, but Father Pfeiffer and Father Hewko were also there. But there was another one in the United States, and so there's a few of them. They were kind of trying to work together in the early days. And I think Bishop Williamson secretly kind of manipulated, used, even as he said he didn't have any authority, he secretly used his influence to try and pull people apart.
But you're speaking about words like the Elison Comments, which I don't know how many people actually read them.
Oh, I think very few I think it was only me, basically, and the only reason I was reading it was to look for what was wrong. But anyway, sorry.
So if he's writing these comments which not many people read, and you're speaking about influence, I mean, these don't seem to be very material.
No, people weren't influenced by his words, but they were influenced one-on-one by him, and they were influenced by his actions. His words in Elison Comments give you a clue as to what he's actually really doing, because what a man will admit openly, you can take it to the bank, right? If he's going to write in Elison Comments, at this point from now on, I'm not even going to impose even a true viewpoint on anyone. And if I know some guy who's in the Novus Ordo, I'm not going to bother to try and get him out of it. If that's what he's prepared to openly admit in Elison Comments, then guess what? That's what he's doing privately, one-on-one, behind the scenes. Yeah, that's my point. I don't think Elison Comments really influence people, but I think they are, if you want to understand his thinking, that, and like I say, it's not just like he kind of mixed his words up one time. He says the same thing again and again consistently. Yeah.
So where is the resistance at now? What is the resistance doing now?
Oh, it's small to the point of non-existence, and it's a handful of priests, and really only a handful of faithful. But it's a thorn in the side of pretty much everybody. The amount of just sheer hatred which we generate from all sides it has to be seen to be believed, and it's a very encouraging sign. We managed to get under the skin of all the right people, which is good. It's quite right too. We should do, because they're wrong and we're right. But what is the resistance doing now? It's professing the faith, and it's little groups of people all over the place, all over the world. With rare visits from priests and mass every few months and that kind of thing. And interestingly, by the way, when people talk about you need sacraments because you need to get the grace, isn't it interesting that we shouldn't exist according to that logic, because we have mass and confession very, very rarely. So how is it we haven't lost more than a decade of having Holy Hour every week and mass occasionally? How have we not lost the faith?
So, final question. If there are so few people, doesn't that perhaps make you doubt of the validity of the existence of the resistance, and that the resistance isn't just straining at gnats with you know, the doctrinal declaration and the errors of Bishop Williamson?
For one thing, there's this famous saying, if we're wrong now, you were wrong then, and all of that kind of thing. Well, that's true of the SSPX. If the resistance is wrong now, the SSPX was wrong. No, I don't think so. I think you look at Vatican II and you look at the teaching of the Church before Vatican II, there is a radical break there. There's just no question about it. And the SSPX was right for all of those years, and Archbishop Lefebvre was right for all of those years. And what we're witnessing now is the fruit of a huge campaign by the enemy to overthrow, well, ultimately to overthrow Western civilization, Christianity, the Catholic culture, effectively, and bring in the reign of the Antichrist. And, you know, they've managed to conquer almost all of the things that stood in their way, and the main thing was the Catholic Church, but they haven't conquered the very last bit of it. Yeah. Do I gather we're nearly at an end here?
Yeah, I think so.
I'd like to point something out. Somebody in the comments last time said they were very happy to see Charette behind me on the wall. And with the very greatest of respect, it's not Charette, it's, I don't know if you can see that, it's Henri de la Roche-Jacquelin. There he is with his arm in a sling. I think that painting of him, he's meant to be 19 years old, and he was elected general by his men because he was just fantastically brave to the point of recklessness. He's the one who famously said, if I advance, follow me, and if I'm afraid, shoot me, something like that. Yeah, and he died in the end. Yeah, but there we go. He's one of our guys. He's with us, really. We're on his team. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much for giving this second interview.
Yeah. And in 6 months we can have a third one, maybe, or whenever it is. Yeah.
Good. God bless.
Yeah. Good. Thank you very much.